Hi, welcome to Making Sense of Complexity, featuring conversations with complexity science practitioners and philosophers. Our goal is to share insights on how to make sense of our complex and uncertain world. Today our guest is noted mathematician and author of The Outer Limits of Reason, Dr. Noson S. Yanofsky. Join us as we discuss the astonishing complexities in mathematics and computer science and the mysterious paradoxes in logical reasoning. Let's begin. Hello, Noson. Welcome to Making Sense of Complexity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward towards this. This is very interesting.
Oh, good. And so where are you calling in from today?
I am from Brooklyn, New York, not New York City, but Brooklyn, New York, which is part of New York City technically, but really Brooklyn is a separate place in the universe.
Yeah, it's on.
And
Yeah.
we're enjoying a beautiful Friday morning. It's actually sunny and pleasant.
So it's a February in New York. It's not
It's a
that cold and
February.
chilly
Right, right. No, no, no,
experience.
no. We only had one cold day this winter, but we're doing good this winter.
Well,
Anyways,
good. Well, thanks for joining me on a nice day. I've got you stuck inside instead of outside in the sun. But let's start with you are, in my view, a remarkable mathematician and logician. You've done a lot of great work, interesting work, and a wonderful book that we'll talk about a little bit as we go. And what drew you into this field? What got you going?
well, so I was a teenage computer geek a long time ago, and was obsessed with computers and really liked them. And I was a computer major as an undergraduate. And but by the time I was in middle of college, I was kind of like bored of it already, or maybe I burnt out or something, and I wanted a little bit more. So I got into computers. I was into mathematics, and so I kind of left computers and went to mathematics, and I got a graduate degree in computers, and then started teaching. And I went back to teaching in the computer department, but I kept my head in mathematics and stuff like that. And then got into quantum computers, which is a little bit about computers and quantum physics and the weirdness of using the weirdness of quantum physics to understand that. And I wrote a book. And in all of these three areas, computers, mathematics, and physics, I was brushing up against unknowables, things that we can't know. And I was seeing common patterns. And I wrote this book, which has been selling very well. It's called The Outer Limits of Reason. What
Yeah.
science, oh, there we have it. What science, mathematics, and logic cannot tell us. And it tries to bring together all these different aspects of what human beings cannot do
Mm-hmm.
and what they'll never be able to do. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and that's exactly what fascinated me. I was interested in math and logic and science back in college, and then ran into some of those paradoxes that you talk about in the book, and the paradoxes have interested me, but the kind of the nuts and bolts, the kind of mathematics you do and logical thinking is really, really difficult stuff. And so I ended up
What
shying
I say
away
is
from
it's
that.
not difficult, but what it is it's diverse. It's in all three of these fields,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it's
Well,
very
that's
interesting.
great. Thank you. So let's start with one of the areas that I think of as sort of mathematical complexity, that some problems can seem pretty simple, but as you add the number of things or the numbers get larger, it becomes really, really, really difficult. And I wonder if you could just maybe talk a little bit about that and where that kind of questioning goes.
Right. So, right. So there are a lot of problems. Well, so this is an interesting thing. You spend your entire life learning what computers can do, and computers can do pretty amazing things. No, it's not. Um, So computers can do amazing things, but we all know that there are many things a computer can't do or we can't do. So we can't tell what tomorrow's lottery numbers are. And we have a hard time telling what next week's Wall Street numbers will be. And what the weather will be in 5 days is pretty much beyond us. All these problems come from complexity. In other words, the amount of information that has to be churned out or worked out can't be done by computers nowadays, or and actually will never be done, to tell you the truth. And maybe I'll explain that later. Um, and so these problems are there are answers to these questions. Tomorrow's lottery numbers, that's an objective question. Um, next week's Wall Street numbers. That's an objective question, which I would like to know the answers to now. And the weather. These are objective questions, but there's no way in the world we're going to get a computer to give the answers. Now, computer scientists have studied a lot of these, and I think the simplest problem was something like the something called the traveling salesman problem, traveling salesperson problem, to be more exact. Anyways, so the traveling salesman problem is easy to state. Let's say you're a salesman and you're trying to go from city to city to sell your stuff. And let's say you want to go to 7 different cities and you want to fly from one city to another exactly once. You never want to go to a city more than once. Stay at each city 3 days or 4 days and sell your widgets that you're selling, and then you want to come home. And so you want to do this in the shortest amount of time, distance. In other words, you don't want to go to one city far away and then come back and then have to go to another city. So you want to do it in the shortest amount of distance to go through all 7 cities exactly once. Okay, and that's not hard to program. You can do that and write out a program. And basically, what you do is you try all different permutations of the cities. In other words, should you go here, there first, and then there, and then there, and then there, or should you go here first, and then there, and then there, and then there? And you try all possibilities. Now, question: how many possibilities are there? So, for 7 cities, it's not hard to calculate. It's basically you have 7 possibilities for the first city, and then you have 6 possibilities for the second city because you already saw the first city, and then you have 5 possibilities for the next city, and then you have 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, and that's 5,040. Right?
And that's known as a factorial, 7 factorial in
That's 7
mathematical
factorial.
jargon. So
Right.
that's not bad, right?
That's not bad.
Yeah.
5,040 is not bad at all. And it turns out, so let's just go through it. For each one of these permutations, for each one of these, you have to go through and see how long of a distance it is. So you have to add up 7 numbers, and then compare it to the other numbers that you're calculating, and you're looking for the smallest of those added up numbers. Okay, so it's 5,040. Your computer that you're talking to me on can do about 1,000,000 in a second, can check 1,000,000 in a second, about. And so it would take microseconds for you to find the answers. Okay, and that's for 7 cities. That's fine. How about for 10 cities? Well, that's a little bit more difficult, but still doable. It's going to be 10 factorial, which is 10 times 9 times 8 times 7 times 2 times 1. Okay, because there are 10 cities that you can try first, and then 9 cities, and then 8 cities. And that turns out to be something like 3 million something, something, something. Okay, which again, if your computer can check 1,000,000 routes, so we're looking at different possible routes of this traveling salesman. If yours can do 1,000,000 in a second, so 3 million will take 3 seconds. Not hard at all. Okay. Question is as follows. Let's say you're really a great traveling salesman and you want to go to 100 cities. How long will that take for the computer to calculate? Okay, so it's not a strange question. It's not an obscure thing that weird professors in Ivy League colleges talk about. Because if you think about it, you're a traveling salesman. You want to travel 300 days a year. You want to go to the 100 most populous cities in the United States. You want to spend 3 days at each city. That's a year. That's a nice job, and you just want to do it in the shortest possible route. So it's not hard. So we sit down and we calculate, and we get 100 times 99 times 98 times 97. We're calculating 100 factorial, and it turns out. And usually I let people guess at how long this will take, but since you read the book, so I'm not going to let you guess. But we'll let the listener just think about, take a wild guess at how long it takes. And it turns out that it'll take something like 1.59 times 10 to the 142 centuries for you to come up with the right answer. And that's simply an amazingly large number. Okay, so it's 1.42 with I'm sorry, 1.59 with 100 with a 159 with 142 numbers afterwards.
That's bigger than the number Google, for anyone that knows what
That's
a
bigger
Google
than the
is.
number
Yeah.
Google, and it's
Yeah.
bigger. And we're just asking for 100 cities. We could have asked for 300 cities or something like that.
Yeah.
And we'll get numbers that are just
Yeah.
wildly astronomical.
So that's an example of a problem that is becomes practically impossible.
Right.
And at a certain point, if you went to 1,000 cities, or you're trying to connect points, you're trying to look at some immune system thing that has hundreds and thousands of things, and you're trying to do calculations, it's practically impossible to be able to do that in a finite amount of time.
Right. You can write a program for it, and the program won't even be that long. And you can start running it. And it will, it's not hard to do that, and it's easy to run this program. It's just going to take too long to find the exact answer. Now, there's ways of trying to get around with it and say, okay, I don't want the exact answer. I want somewhat of an exact answer.
Close enough. Yes.
Close enough, and we can do that, and we can do that in a normal amount of time, and that's a good, and that's what businesses do.
Right, and that's what your GPS is doing when you ask for a route, right? It's not looking at the permutation of every single road you could travel on. It's just taking some shortcuts and doing a hack and giving you a good enough answer.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the GPS is actually a little bit better, but ways right, but right. So a lot of times we can get an almost good answer, and that's fine for most people, and it's fine for most businesses. But just theoretically, what's wrong? What's going on here? And I would just like to explain why this number is so humongous, why it takes so long. And the idea is, take any number, multiply it by 10, and you're going to add a digit to the number. Right? Multiply it by 100, and you're going to add 2 digits to the number. Well, basically, take 100, take 99, multiply it by 100, you're adding 2 digits. Multiply it by 98, you're almost adding 2 digits. 97, you're almost adding. So most of the time, these are 2-digit numbers. Think of the numbers from 1 to 100. 90 of them are 2-digit numbers. And so you're multiplying by 2-digit numbers. And basically, every time you're doing that, you're adding another digit. So you get a humongous amount.
Yeah. So the practical side of it is easy to understand. You just explained it really well. But sort of, is there a theoretical side of this? Like, problems that are pragmatically impossible, but, are there things, that, what does this lead you to in terms of the impossibility of certain problems to be solved in a finite amount of time?
Right. So, so practically it's impossible. I mean, just the amount. So the universe will be in a heat death, before the answer will come up. 10 to the 142 centuries is longer than the universe ever existed, and longer than the universe ever will exist. So it's not even there. Now, I just want to say, a lot of people, when I present this, they say, "Oh, it's okay. We're going to get faster computers, and we're going to be able to solve this in a faster amount of time." Okay, so that's a typical answer. And you're of a certain age, I'm of a certain age, where you can see this, you understand this. So, for example, a computer that you had on your desk 30 years ago is 10,000 times slower than the computer that you're using now. Okay, so you
Hmm.
might say, look, I'm going to wait 10,000 years, 30 years, and I'm going to get another computer that's going to get 10,000 times faster than this computer. And that's a legitimate answer, and it will save you time. Okay, but when you're dealing with these giant numbers, if you're looking at, let's say, 10 to the 142 centuries, and you say, you know what, I want to do this 10,000 times faster, which means I'm basically taking 10 to the 142 centuries and dividing by 10,000. Okay, so 1/10,000th of 142 centuries. It turns out that you just subtract 4 from the exponents. So it becomes
Hmm.
10 to the 138 centuries. So even if you wait 30 years and you get another computer that works 10,000 times faster, then you only have to wait 10 to the 138 centuries, which is absolutely mine. Whatever. Still, after the heat death of the universe, it's not helping you.
Right. So in that practical sense on computers, if you think about faster and faster and faster and faster, you'll quickly get to the point where you don't have the capacity of putting transistors within the individual atoms to
Right.
actually expand. So you're stuck either the nearly infinite amount of time it takes, or the nearly infinite amount of computing capacity it takes, neither of which are physically possible.
Right. So that's right. Some people say that computers will not be, in 30 years, computers will be 10,000 times faster, but at some point that's going to stop.
Hmm.
It simply can't continue forever.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not. But either way, it ain't helping you with the traveling salesman
Right.
problem.
And is this issue of the difficulty of more complications to unravel things? This is the basis for what we call cryptography, right? The
Right.
the
So,
codes and the passwords and things that make it impossible for somebody to hack in with the brute force calculations, right?
right. Right. So all of cryptography, in other words, all the passwords are now based on this following counterintuitive idea. I mean, it's extremely counterintuitive, but and I don't know if any physicist ever really thought about it, from the physics point of view. And the counterintuitive idea is if I give you two numbers and I ask you to multiply them, you can do that with ease. Okay, as big as the numbers are, you know how to do it, and you're going to do it. It depends how big this number is, but you know how to do it with ease. In contrast, if I give you a number and I tell you this number is the product, the multiplication of two numbers, and I ask you, tell me what are the two numbers? In other words, somehow find the factors. Okay, that is a very hard problem.
Hmm.
Okay, and it demands a lot of work to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
again, for small numbers, if I give you 15, you'll say, oh, that's 3 times 15, 3 times 5, no problem. And 28, and you say, oh, that's 4 times 7, no problem.
Yeah.
But if I give you numbers in the hundreds of bits, it's practically impossible.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, again, sort of the technical phrase of prime number factorization, where you take a number and you kind of look at the prime numbers that factor into it. It
Right,
sounds easy,
right,
but it becomes incredibly difficult very fast. And there are open questions about, prime numbers, and, is there a biggest one, or, how do you find the one that's the closest to the particular, there are lots of problems that are practically insoluble because the computational requirements are so immense.
and it's a shocking thing. Why should one process be easy, and the inverse process, the process that undoes it, should be
Mm-hmm.
hard? Just in terms of, we think of physics. In physics, everything is one way is doable and the other way is doable. The laws of physics are essentially
Mm-hmm.
invertible, and yet this is not true. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Just one more thing. We were talking about ways of solving the traveling salesman problem. So we saw that faster computers are not going to help you. And a lot of people say, you know what? I have on my laptop, it says duo processors, and I'm going to get many processors to do it, or I'm going to use fancy language now. I'm going to upload it to the cloud and let everyone download part of the problem and we'll solve this problem quickly. I'll get 10,000 people to solve this problem. And again, that's true. But again, taking 10 to the 142 centuries and dividing by 10,000 leaves you 10 to the 138 centuries, which doesn't really solve the problem. I just want to just from the you always bring in physics and complexity. Just from the physics point of view, physicists tell us that the universe, not Earth, the universe consists of something like 10 to the 80 particles. Okay, I have no idea how they calculated this. I'm not even sure it's correct, but I can't say if it's too high or too low. Okay, what this tells us is if that every single particle in the universe was working on this traveling salesman problem. Okay, so this is panpsychism.
Hmm.
Every single particle in the universe is conscious computer working just on this problem. It would still take trillions and trillions of centuries to solve this problem. So it's not that our computers are not strong enough. It's not that it's the universe is not strong enough to let us solve this problem.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
universe is simply not big enough to give us an exact answer to this problem with just 100 cities.
Yeah.
So that's a shocking thing.
Yeah. So it's in theory, it's solvable, but
Yeah.
not in a finite or not in a reasonable amount of time or with a reasonable amount of available computing capacity. It's simply impossible in that sense,
Right.
although it's theoretically possible.
Right. And there are two other possible, ways of solving this. And again, okay, so one of them is quantum computers. People say, "Oh yeah, but maybe quantum computers can do that." And I wrote a book on quantum computers. It's a great book. Advertisement, shameless advertisement. And no, it's not going to help you that much. Quantum computers can do many things. In particular, it can factor large numbers in a short amount of time. Okay, and maybe the NSA has a quantum computer in their basement so that they can read all the hidden communications. So they have that. But a problem like the traveling salesman problem, they cannot solve in a reasonable amount of time.
Hmm.
Also, trillions of centuries.
Hmm.
And one fourth way of solving it is maybe there's a better algorithm than just trying every single possible route. That just is too much. Maybe there's a better algorithm. And there's been a search for these better algorithms for 70 years, almost,
Yeah.
and no one's been able to find it. And
Hmm.
it's been shown that it's very hard to believe such an algorithm exists.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that I know there's the I guess the Clay Prize in mathematics. You could
That's the
earn $1 million
PhD. Right.
if
That's
you
the
could solve that problem and say, oh, for all of this special class of difficult problems, I found a shortcut.
Or for all this difficult problems, I can tell you there is no
No
shortcut.
shortcut.
So it's either P is equal to NP or P is not equal to NP. Either way you solve it, you get $1 million, and I will stand up and clap for you.
Yeah. Well, and if it was you, you could. So that's thank you, Nelson. This is a journey down a road of complexity that it is mind-boggling, and it's hard to kind of get a sense of. But again, you do a great job of just sort of explaining something in a way that everybody can understand, and then it becomes mind-boggling to realize the implications. It just, we can't go there. There are problems we can't solve. So when people say, oh, if I knew what the position of every particle in the universe was, and I know the laws of physics, I could perfectly predict the future.
Yeah, but the universe is too small in the following sense. The universe is too small for us to be able to do that. The traveling salesman problem. That's not going to make you a rich person. But if you were able to do this for the lottery numbers. That's
Yeah.
probably the quickest thing. You can make $1 billion, but you know, and there you don't even have to look at the particles in the universe. You have to look at the particles in the box where the lottery balls are bouncing around.
Hmm.
If I could
Yeah.
just know where every one of those particles are and whatever, and even if I did know them, I
Yeah.
couldn't. It wouldn't help.
Yeah. And then another caveat is, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but another problem is that some of those physical processes in that box are what's known as chaotic processes that there is no formula to be able to tell you what the outcome is going to be over a period of time, because it's a chaotic process that has statistical possibilities that are impossible to
Exactly.
determine.
So anybody who's taken high school physics knows that Newton gave us a formula of how two objects are attracted to each other, right? And mass one times mass two divided by r squared, the distance
Mm-hmm.
squared, right? It's simple. Now ask yourself the simple question: what about three particles?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I have three particles, and I'd like to know what the relationship is between these three particles. And this is not an abstract question. Okay. Here's a pen. Here's my body. Here's the planet Earth. I'd like to know what the relationship is between these three things. Okay. And it turns out, you might say, oh, well, I only took high school physics. I don't know, that advanced stuff. If I would have taken college physics, I would have known it. And the answer is no, they don't know it in college physics. This is called the three body problem. They don't know it in college physics. They don't know it in graduate school physics. It's an unknown answer. Um, and just to give you another example of a three body problem that's very, very interesting is look at the sun, look at the earth, and look at the moon. Okay, those are three bodies, and they're all tugging at each other very, very
Gently,
gently,
gently. Yeah.
and they're turning around. Now, when you're looking at it and you're looking at the moon, I'm sorry, and you're looking at the Earth, you could say, you know what, the sun is so much larger than the moon. I might as well ignore the moon and just
Mm-hmm.
think of it as a two-body problem. And
Mm-hmm.
you can do that, and you can calculate how long it takes for the Earth to go around the sun, and you get, you can look it up in Google. They have the
Mm-hmm.
answer to 7 digits,
Yeah.
et
Yeah.
cetera. But now you ask yourself the following question. Okay, but I want to know how long does it take for the moon to go around the Earth? Okay, but I have two things pulling on the moon. I have the Earth and I have the sun. So it turns out that it's a chaotic system. And it's not, if you look it up, you'll see it says on average,
Mm-hmm.
it takes the moon to go around the Earth, so that's called a lunar month, 29.5 days. Okay, but
More
what's
or
being
less.
more or less? Well, what do you mean more or less? We've been looking at this for 5,000 years. We know about the moon. Why can't we give an exact amount? And the answer is there is no exact amount, and you cannot calculate it exactly.
Yeah.
It's a chaotic system.
So let me ask you a question. Is the three body problem like the traveling salesman problem? It just got really complicated, or is it not soluble?
Okay, so I got to tell you a cute story. So, and we'll get if I sidetrack, catch me on. So I was talking to my professor, my thesis advisor, and I told him it's a very interesting thing that there are some differential equations which describe the motion of certain particles, and we have no idea, and how the particles are moving, and we have no idea how to solve these differential equations. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, we have no way of figuring out how it works, and yet the particles know what to do. In other words, we don't know it. We don't have the brain power to figure out what the particles should do, but the particles know what to do. And so my thesis advisor said something so brilliant. He said, He says, well, that's what science is about. Science is not about calculating because they're much better at calculating. They know what to do. Science is about understanding.
Hmm.
Okay. And that's what our brains are for. Our brains are for understanding, why the particle goes
Hmm.
here or the particle goes there. And that's what we can do and not necessarily calculate. Okay, so it's a little bit different than the traveling salesman and Wall Street and the weather because we don't even have formulas. Now, there are infinite formulas, but it's hard to even understand what an infinite formula is, whatever. But we don't have a finite method of even solving these three
Hmm.
body problems. By the way, it's very interesting. So, in some sense, they're more harder than the traveling salesman. It's very interesting. You have if the universe had no particles in it whatsoever, we'd be able to solve it. There's no change, there's no movement. If it had one particle, we'd be able to figure out where that particle is. We look where it is now, we look at it later, we'll figure it out. If it had two particles, thank you, Mr. Newton, we know how to solve that. Okay? But the universe has 10 to the 80 particles, not 3,
Hmm.
4, 5, 10 to the 80 particles. So we to get exact solutions to things is nearly impossible. Now, physicists are smart people, and what they do is they make idealized things.
Hmm. Ideal gas laws. Hmm. Yep.
Idealized gas. And we don't look at the sun as some 10 to the 10 different particles bouncing around. We look at the sun and we look at the center of the sun and we say that's what we're looking at, and that's we idealize things
Hmm.
by doing
Hmm.
that. That's the only way we can make progress in predictions. But you can't take away from that the fact that the true nature of the universe is way beyond us.
Hmm.
It
Yes.
is way, way beyond us.
Yeah.
And
And that's a rather
humbling.
can be humbling, yeah, and disheartening if you think, well, like if I only had all the data, I could solve it. It's not possible, and even with a three body problem, it's not possible. So we have these limits, as you point out, the limits to our capacities to do those things, and it's a humbling feeling. Yeah.
It's humbling. I don't see it as depressing. I mean, it would be depressing if we understood everything in the universe, and that would be somewhat like if you're ever stuck in someplace and you have nothing to read, you don't have a book behind you don't have a
Hmm.
book, so you start reading the toothpaste and ingredients and say what's really in here,
Hmm.
because you're bored out of your mind. What this shows you is we'll never be bored out of our minds.
Right. So it's an infinite process ultimately of trying to get better at understanding the things that we don't understand.
Right, right,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
infinite. Right, it's an infinite process. It'll never end, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. So I want to take a change over to another area that you've worked on extensively and that I really love, and that's the area of kind of the paradoxical findings that, to my mind, sit at the heart of logical systems. It's kind of this big issue, and so it's a little bit different, maybe type of complexity or insolvability kind of issue, but it's very, very interesting. And I wonder if you could, introduce that concept maybe with a paradox that seems simple. We can understand it, and then let's talk about what the implications of that paradox are.
Okay, good. So this paradox goes back to about 2,500 years. So it's not me, and it goes back. It's something called the liar paradox, and it goes back to somebody named Epimenides who lived on Crete, which is an island off Greece, and he didn't like his neighbors, so he was a curmudgeon of an old man, and he used to stick his head out of the window and scream out, "Get the hell out of my driveway!" He didn't like his neighbors, and so he said in some poem, he said, "All Cretans are liars." The problem with that is he was a Cretan, and his sentence or his declaration goes on him also, and on what comes out of his mouth. And so he's talking not only about all cretins, but he's talking about this sentence that's coming out of his mouth. And it's a lie that all cretins are liars. Okay. Now, there's a much more modern version of that. And it goes, just the English or any language, but the English language discusses not only things in the universe. The weather is pretty. This is a pleasant shack. There are the books behind me are there, whatever. But it can talk about language. So you could
Hmm.
say something like this: um, the the wording in the Declaration of Independence is a very interesting wording. Okay, so that's a sentence about English.
It
Okay,
makes sense,
it makes
and
sense, right?
it's true.
And it's true. And so, or if you're stuck in a room, you'll start saying, the wording and the ingredients of the toothpaste bar the toothpaste thing is very interesting. Um, Also, but not only can language talk about language, but language can talk about itself. Okay,
Hmm.
so you can say things like this. This sentence has 5 words. It's a 5-word sentence that talks about itself, and it's saying something true. Okay, you could also say this sentence has 7 words. That's an English sentence that's false, but it's about itself.
Hmm.
Okay, but then you can go even further, and you can deny itself, and you can say this sentence is false. And it turns out this sentence is false. If it's true, then what it says is it's false. And if it's false, what it says is it's false that this sentence is false. That makes it true. And you get into a conundrum. So is it true or false? And there are ways of getting around it, and there are ways of just ignoring it. Like you say, look, I'm not an English professor. I don't care if this sentence is true or false, or things like that. Or you can say things like this, many sentences that come out of my mouth are not true or false. Like, what's for supper tonight? That's a perfectly legitimate English sentence, and it's on my mind, but it doesn't have a true or false value. Or go directly to jail. So that's a command, and it doesn't have a problem. But the main point is because language has the ability to talk about itself and to negate itself, you get these complexities. You get these, I shouldn't use the word complexities, you get these problems. And what was discovered, or what was done, this idea of things referring to themselves and you getting problems with it, is something that's been going on for the past 150 years, and you get a lot of very interesting results. Okay,
Hmm.
so most of it goes back to a guy named George Cantor, who was a German in the 1880s. And what he found was, what? Numbers can talk about themselves also. In other words, you can have numbers or elements of sets referring to elements of sets. And what you get is that set theory is self referential, and you
Right.
can negate itself, and you get different sizes. He was able to get different sizes.
Yeah, and the simple question is, okay, the set of all sets, right?
Right,
That's the big one. We want the
right,
set of all sets.
right.
Is the set of all sets a
Does it
member of
contain
itself?
itself?
Yeah,
Right,
does it contain itself?
right. And you start losing your mind when you think of these things. But um,
And by the way, Cantor did end up in a
right, in
sanitarium, as
insane
I
asylums.
understand it.
Right.
It was a very difficult problem that he couldn't really solve. Yeah.
So right, but at the end he did solve it, and he solved it in a beautiful way, and he taught us how to think in a very real sense. Okay, um, and from him went on Bertrand Russell, dealt with these issues, and he made a very interesting paradox called the Barber paradox. And he also dealt with sets, and not only sizes of sets but elements of sets. They worked on these ideas from Cantor, and then the most brilliant logician since Aristotle, named Kurt Gödel, he said not only can sets talk about themselves, not only can language talk about themselves, but mathematics can talk about themselves. And you can formulate in English, in mathematics, in English, you can formulate this sentence is false. in mathematics, you can formulate this sentence is unprovable. Okay, and we go through the same thing. If it's provable, well, then it says it's unprovable. So how could you prove something that's unprovable? There must be something wrong with your system.
Right. And I just want to pause there for a second because that's a very simple sentence. This is unprovable. This proof is unprovable, or this statement
No,
is
this
unprovable.
statement
Yeah, this statement is
does
unprovable.
unprovable.
It's very simple, but Gödel found that this applied to what we would have thought as the perfect rational system of logical statements, logical principles, right?
And arithmetic,
Arithmetic as
which
a
is
part of,
taught
yeah,
in third grade.
yeah, yeah,
And he showed no, yes, everything in third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade seems simple, but there are statements in arithmetic that use plus and minus and times and exponentiation that give you statements that are true but unprovable. And Gödel was just the beginning of the story, because what we went on to show is that the vast majority of statements in arithmetic are unprovable. And it's not just this particular sentence. There are many, many, many sentences in arithmetic that are true but unprovable. And in fact, the power of proof is very, very limited
yeah.
in some sense.
This was very disappointing to find out when I was in college studying mathematics.
Right. And even mathematics
Very
has
difficult.
not falsehoods, but proofs. By the way, you might say, why didn't he just formulate the sentence, this sentence is false? And he kind of did it, but somebody else named Tarski did it also. And basically, that's a little bit less interesting because either the system that you're dealing with is true or false, and if it's true, then this statement is not true. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But the more interesting version is Gödel's version, namely, this sentence is unprovable,
Yeah.
which is an amazing statement. But
And
yeah, sorry.
I was going to extend that a little bit because there's the discussion amongst physicists and mathematicians about the universe and the laws of physics are mathematical. So we describe the world in mathematical terms, arithmetical and other forms of mathematics, and so this principle of the unprovability of many statements also implicates physics,
Physics.
correct?
Right. So not only what we spoke about 10 minutes ago, that physics doesn't have equations for every single phenomenon, but even things that they do have nice, sweet equations, okay, the math is going to be sometimes too complicated to answer. Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't take away from physics and it doesn't take away from math. There's a tremendous
Mm-hmm.
amount of interactions between math and physics, and they're both pushing each other to new things. And string theory is basically a mathematical theory. Whatever,
Mm-hmm.
they're just saying, if mathematics is at the base of physics, then eventually you're going to come to unsolvable things in physics also.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And some of us who know very little about physics think that quantum mechanics poses some of those unsolvable
Right.
mysteries of
Right.
that's a different subject, but
No, it's not. It's not
yeah.
a different subject. Actually, it's related. But I want to get to it in a second. So Gödel talked about, and he showed mathematics is self-referential and therefore somewhat limited. And then living near Gödel at the same time in a little city named Princeton, New Jersey, was a man named Alan Turing, who was an Englishman who came to Princeton to study under a guy named Alonzo Church. And this is in the 1930s. So this is before his work on the imitation game, which is a good
Mm-hmm.
movie, strongly recommended.
Mm-hmm.
And what Turing did was he defined a computer. He said, "What let's give a formal definition of what we mean by a computer," and he showed computers can talk about themselves also.
Right.
Okay, and we know computers can talk about themselves because that's what an operating system is. An operating
Right.
system is a computer program that deals with computer programs, which
Yeah.
is exactly what you want.
Yeah.
Okay. And he showed that there's some limitations to computers also. And this is a famous thing called the halting problem, that no computer can tell if another computer is an infinite loop or not.
Right.
And so, again, it's the same idea over and over and over
Yeah.
again
Yeah.
to get that.
I
Now,
love
let's.
the in the Imitation Game. I'm sure you remember that scene where Alan Turing is looking at the Enigma machine with the dials spinning and the dials spinning, and he's waiting and waiting and waiting. I thought that was such a beautiful image of the halting problem because
He
didn't
doesn't know.
know. Now, in that case, they figured a way around it, and they managed to solve the enigma and they get a happy ending. But that one scene was an epitome of okay, we just don't know if this program is going to end up in an infinite loop or not. It's just we just don't know before we run the program and see.
Right. Can I tell you what I got out of that movie? Which I mean, it's a profound thought. So one of the central ideas of that movie is that they were able to break the enigma, and they were able to tell when certain communications to U-boats were going to blow up certain ships, and just because they had that knowledge, they didn't want to use that
Yeah.
knowledge and tell that ship, "Hey, there's a U-boat on your way. Get the hell out of there." And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why they didn't do that is because then the Germans would have figured out, "Hey, they broke our enigma. We have to use something else."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so they said, "Oh, here's a message that says a U-boat is going to blow up that ship, and we are not going to tell that ship to go away, and 5,000, 3,000 people on that ship are going to get killed, and that's just something that we're going to have to do, quote unquote, for the better good."
Yeah.
And I
That's
knew
a
about this
that's a
before because
tough.
I read about it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember talking to somebody and I said, like, how could, and obviously Alan Turing wasn't making those decisions. Those decisions went up straight to Churchill.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I realized then that I never want to go into politics, which basically is about making decisions for the better good of everyone at the expense of individuals. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what politicians do,
Yeah.
and
It's sometimes,
I'm glad
and
there are
it's
politicians.
another kind of insoluble problem when you're trying to balance values that are different and make
Right.
decisions on that basis. The other anecdote from some of the war about a cryptographic solution to communications was the United States in the Pacific utilized Navajo Native Americans
Right.
for their communication between ship to ship communication and across the theater because nobody in
Right.
the
Nobody knew
Axis
their
powers
language.
knew what they were talking about. I just that
Mm.
was another interesting thing.
It's a fascinating thing, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
So
now,
once I, so we,
go ahead.
back to the list of things that are self-referential. So we have Turing showing that computers are self-referential and therefore limited. And I'd like to get to quantum mechanics
Hmm.
because anybody who's ever thought about quantum mechanics, and I'm going to put this in the most knows that question: what is light? Is light a particle or is light a wave?
Yeah.
And the answer is, well, it depends how you measure it.
Hmm.
And that is the most unsatisfying answer ever in all of science. I mean,
Hmm.
and it reveals the the uncomfortableness of quantum mechanics. In other words, if you do an experiment in which you're expecting a wave, you're going to get a wave, and if you're doing an experiment which expects a particle, then you're going to get a particle, and those answers are un that's not good. Well, what that shows is that the experiment is part of the system that you're measuring. Okay, so usually you think, oh, here's a system, and I want to poke it and figure out what's going on in this system. And here it's saying, no, 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 this is the system, but you have to include the experiment into the system. And
Hmm.
that has a feel of self-reference to it.
Hmm.
And so
That's
it's
what's
this,
called, yeah, the observer problem in quantum mechanics is you can't get away from the fact that the observer is a part of the system. Yeah,
right. And so that's
yeah,
again within the same realm that self-reference
yeah. And
shows up.
another example of self-reference is we sort of extended up one more level, and that is, the human mind, which everybody's trying to figure out, but it's
Right.
obviously self-referential. We talk about ourselves all the time.
All the time. And we're thinking about ourselves all the time. And I mean, and if you read Freud, I mean, basically a hell of a lot of psychoanalysis is discussing Freud's life.
Yeah.
I mean, because he thought this and he thought that, and he made theories based on that. And right, the mind is self-referential, and just to give you instead of having an English sentence saying this sentence is false, how about having the following thought: I am wrong now. Close your eyes and try to have that thought.
Hmm.
This thought
Hmm.
is wrong.
Well, I could say, "Oops, I
Oops.
was wrong, but now I'm right."
Right.
So, but it's a workaround. So these are this amazing set of difficulties arising in mathematical problems and logical systems that um, really create puzzles. And so, are these aren't ever, we're never going to solve them. We can
Nope.
work around them, but never going to solve them. They're a permanent fixture of the universe, of math, of physics, of our human minds, right?
Of reason itself. In other words,
Yeah.
it's built into reason itself, and all of math, science, logic is based on this.
So, what does that say about whether, how do you answer the question, is the universe comprehensible? Can we understand it?
We can understand large parts of. Oh no, we can understand parts of it. I don't want to use the word large. And we're making progress, and we should never stop, trying to make progress. But no, there's something about it in which we will never know everything,
Yeah.
and that's an interesting thought.
So, Nassim, you don't seem to be particularly perturbed by that thought. I mean, you've
No,
been in
I'm
this field,
excited
you're
by it.
pursuing these questions. You don't seem perturbed that this is an insoluble set of problems. We will never answer all. It's an infinite process. So you're comfortable with that, right?
Right, it's like when you meet somebody new and they're interesting, okay, and you want to know everything about them, and you ask them a million questions, and they have mysterious backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. Um, as opposed to that, when you meet somebody that you know for 50 years and you're bored out of your mind from them. So I look at the universe as a first date, a perpetual first date. You'll never know everything about them.
Yeah.
No, not perturbed about it at all.
Yeah. So it's a curiosity that is fun. I mean, it's a
Right.
fun. So I wanted to change mode just a little bit. Ask about your religious tradition and how that tradition may have changed over time as you learn more about math and science, if there's been a change, or do you feel that your religious tradition is perfectly compatible with these questions, or has it evolved? So just speak to that for a minute.
Well, so I was born in a religious family, and I lived 12 blocks away from where I was, grew up. So I haven't traveled that far. No, so I've been to different countries, but I haven't. In that sense, I haven't traveled far. But so I come from a Jewish background, and I can't say that that the science has changed me or my religion, but I have noticed some of the common themes that the religion has. Okay, and Judaism is somewhat based on the Bible, and the first story of the Bible after creation is the story of Adam and Eve and the snake. And if you think about what the snake tells Eve, he says, well, God says to Eve, Adam and Eve, don't eat from this tree of knowledge. And Eve says, no, 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 no. He's trying to hold you back.
Mm.
Eat from the apple, and then you'll have knowledge. You'll be as God. You shall be as gods. In other words, so even from the beginning of the Bible, there's this separation between what human beings can do and the knowledge that you have, and the knowledge that's out there. In some sense, God has.
Hmm.
So such themes do play a role in religion.
Yeah, and I think one might say, well, we're trying to eat from the tree of the knowledge of knowledge, and we're finding that there are things that we can never understand,
Right.
never will reach, and
Right.
so that's comfortable with your with your belief in God, an infinite creator God of some sort, that that we have these puzzles that we can never reach, we can never solve them with our human
Right.
rational finite minds.
Right. And another place where this is very prominent is the book of Job. So the book of
Mm-hmm.
Job is 35 chapters of complaining about why the just suffer or why the good
Mm-hmm.
suffer, and there, of course, there's no answer to why the good suffer. There's absolutely, nobody's ever given a good answer to that question. Um, even if even if you believe the universe is a random thing and not created by God, you still don't have a good answer to why the just
Right.
suffer. I mean,
Right.
it's a horrifying thing.
Yeah.
And at the end of the book of Job, God comes and he gives an answer. Okay. But if you read the answer, it's not really an answer. He comes out of the whirlwind and he basically says, You, Job, you don't have the right to ask me these questions because you don't know this, and you don't know this, and you don't know how the animals do this, and you don't know how the sun goes over here, and you don't know the firmament of the universe, and you don't know what the world stands on. In other words, he's giving God is giving man, um, he's taking away man's right to judge him because man is ignorant of the universe, of the
And
full.
you have shown that there are things that we will always be ignorant of.
Exactly, and right.
Yeah.
So one shouldn't battle God in
Yeah.
that sense. By the way,
That's yeah.
Job responds to God, and basically he says as follows. He says, "I shall put my hand over my mouth. I won't speak anymore." In other words, not that I don't have questions. Everybody has questions, and again, the question of the just suffering, no one's ever going to give you an answer to that. I have questions. I always will have questions, but I'm going to put my hand over my mouth because I don't have the right to ask such questions
Mm-hmm.
or to ask them in an accusatory fashion. But
Oh, that's
you
interesting.
always have questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I have one last question. Speaking of questions, uh, do you have an experience in your life that you felt was unexplainable or even mystical, perhaps something that shaped the trajectory of your life?
So I've had emotional experiences. That's So I recently lost my father. That was terribly he was ill for a while, and that was terribly emotional. About 5 years ago, I lost my older brother, and it
Mm.
was also extremely heartbreaking in some sense. And of course, I've had positive experiences. I remember um, literally carrying my oldest child as a baby from the
Mm.
hospital, taking her home and bringing her to my parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
And I just broke down crying. It was such a
Mm-hmm.
powerful experience. I mean, here you are,
Mm-hmm.
your parents. You owe so much to your parents, and they raised you, and here you're bringing your child to
Mm-hmm.
uh, whatever. There are no words to describe that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Well, I have three more children, and I did the same thing. And again, those were powerful, positive experiences. But those are emotional experiences. Mystical experiences, no. I can't say I've ever had a mystical experience. But I want to tell you an interesting thing. I had this conversation with a professor who took a logic course. He was a philosophy professor who took a logic course and a set theory course in college. And he was an atheist in every sense of the word, but he said there were all these different levels of infinity and exactness and perfect, nature of mathematics. He said he really had, for him, such an experience was a mystical experience.
Mm-hmm.
Just at some sense, seeing everything perfectly, it was just a mystical experience for him, and I thought that was very interesting. That even someone like him could say that. I want to read a quote from Winston Churchill, who we mentioned before, who's capable of making decisions about life and death.
Mm.
He says as follows. I'm reading from my book. I had a feeling once about mathematics that I saw it all. Depth beyond depth was revealed to me. The abyss and the abyss. I saw as one might see the transit of Venus or even the Lord's Mayor's show. I don't even know what that means. A quantity passing through infinity and changing its sign from plus to minus. I saw exactly how it happened and why the trig of Churchill writes very well, was inevitable, and how one step involved all the others. It was like politics. But it was after dinner and I let it go. So you can tell, I mean, Churchill, I don't know if he was good in math or not good in math. He definitely wasn't interested in math, but at some point he saw it, he understood it, and he had such a mystical experience.
Yeah. And I think the way you talked about your children, is it safe to say if you look for meaning in your life, it's not going to be in the formulas or this, it's going to be in the life that you're living with.
Can I tell you one other story?
Yeah.
I know a woman, whatever, she's an editor of my book, and a firm atheist in every sense of the word, but she sometimes has dreams about numbers, and she plays these numbers in the lottery game, and she wins. She has wins. Sometimes she's off by a number. Sometimes she's not. I'm not saying whether she wins more or less, but Karen wins. And I asked her once, I said, Karen, can I ask you a question? As an atheist, how do you explain this? That, you're having these dreams and you're solving, the lottery problem and you're getting it, like you're winning these, you're winning these lottery things. And she said to me, Noson, I have to tell you, when I'm holding my ticket in my hand and I'm going to get the money for the thing, such questions don't arise. And it's true. It's it's a very real answer.
Yeah.
Can,
Yeah.
because I listened to some of your other podcasts and I was thinking about how people do have mystical experiences and people don't. And its relationship with religion. People who have mystical experiences can start a religion or start a movement or have a movement within the religion. But in general, most people don't have mystical experiences, as far as I see. And it also, in some sense, religion, in order to maintain itself, has to somehow crack down on that. Meister Eckhart, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
You can't have that. Everyone having a mystical. There has to be. You can't have everyone trying to do this.
Well, and that, some people might say that when mystical experiences are shared and then are used to build guidelines and limits and boxes in which other people are asked to stay, is an interesting question as to whether that's the same thing. I mean, religions are a human institution in our culture, in our society, in our civilization. And so religions maybe play a very different role than spiritual experiences or mystical experiences do. Yeah. Well, Noson, this has been a fabulous conversation. I've really enjoyed it. We've taken a long journey, and we've found ourselves comfortable with the place we're at, where there's lots of unknowns and uncertainties and unanswerables. And you know what? It's okay.
Right. It's fun. It's interesting.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And you're welcome. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Making Sense of Complexity. Join me next time for a conversation with Mark Cohen, a neuroscientist and co-inventor of functional magnetic imaging resonance, as we discuss the structure and function in the human brain, the complexities of machine learning, and the beauty of musical polyrhythms and harmonics. In the meantime, please explore the websites of our collaborators, Complexity Adventures, Planksip, and Talk of Today, and join the conversation on our social media outlets or at spiralinquiry.org. Stay well and have a great week.